Chapter 28. Two-tracking it into the future. Dad came home laughing as he told a short little story. There was a woman who lived 3 miles out of town along a road with deep ditches, and she had a passel of children, and she would beat them in the back seat as she drove down the road. Dad said someday she's going to drive right into the ditch beating her kids. Well, she did, and Dad felt so smart predicting the future. He had to pay the claim, but it was worth it. Maybe she'll stop beating her kids, he says. By now, we were expert drinkers and drivers. We could buy beer anywhere with our money, and we did. Sundays could be so boring. No, really, they were so boring beyond belief, unless you really enjoyed watching the corn grow. I will tell you, though, if you go out in the asparagus patch early in the morning when the dew is heavy and place your ear upon the ground, you can hear the asparagus grow. It's like reaching through the glass into another world. Sundays were another world. Laughter and fun was all we had. A friend acquired an antique car for our Sunday cruise, and that really spiced up the day. It was a typical 1950s big fendered thing. Tooling down a country road, we got to laughing and missed a curve and ended up sliding that big old heavy car right straight into the ditch. We were all flung forward, making it very awkward to get out of the car. Nobody was hurt, but the kid got a little nervous about the car and what his relative would say. Without thinking, we walked to the front of the car, got into position, and together picked that car back up and shoved it onto the roadbed. We climbed back into the car, opened fresh beers, and started off again. My friend says, good thing we didn't slip, we would have all been crushed. Yeah, near death number 742. What's another one? An M46 sat a little house awkwardly below the road grade. One day, the EMS showed up to retrieve a man out of its back bedroom. The man had multiple symptoms that include lightheadedness, stomach pains, and headache. His symptoms were somewhat vague, but troublesome. On a lark, the EMS mentioned to the emergency room doctor that they had been in that same bedroom 3 times retrieving men with similar symptoms. 3 was definitely a pattern. There was some investigation done on the house, and it was discovered that the bedroom was built over an uncapped oil well. They had been sleeping in fumes, and they all had almost died. Environmental safety was not the top concern back then, but it often should have been. Past Sandusky's away was a dumping ground for Detroit manufacturers. They sent huge tanker trucks up to us with sludge and just dumped it in the fields or forests. One time they wanted to pump Detroit sewage to the thumb and spray it on all the fields. The powers that be finally admitted it created a hard crust over the field and would not be tillable in a few years. Everyone realized they were treating us as their sewage pit and said no in no uncertain terms. That city plan just elevated the reasoning to keep out economic development because nothing would be respected. We may have a plain life, but it was a respectable life. Spraying shit on fields was not respectable to anyone or anything. Years later, I had a friend who ran a testing company for pollution in brownfields. He said Sandusky was the only place he totally suited up to collect specimens. Said it was the worst place he'd ever experienced. It is still like that today, and no one cares because it's a thumb. Dad used to say the Canadians took better care of us than our own government. I wish the Canadian government had helped us take better care of Saginaw Bay. When I was a youngster in the early 1960s, you could catch all the perch you could eat and then some. During the next 30 years, the lake died from a combination of pollution, specifically DDT and PCBs, zebra mussels, overfishing, and silt. Today you can fly over the bay and not see a thing. No weeds, no fish, no anything. When the forests were milled and the swamps drained with big, deep ditches, it opened up the farmland, but it further assaulted Saginaw Bay with silt. Fishing was a billion-dollar industry, and now the bay is mainly relegated to sport fishing, if you can find anything, skiing, and sunsets. Many people at the time could go down to the bay and get supper without a banknote or a piece of silver. Nowadays, they must gather cans or government support to fill their bellies. Man, I'm starting to think this book is about my dad. He was quite a character. He said just before the war, a box full of wood came into the lumberyard and it was not up to their previous specifications. The lumberyard was started as a mill and two of his brothers took ownership. Not my dad, although he was always interested in the business of wood and wood products. This new development was earth-shattering. The whole load had knots in it. They had never seen wood with knots. Can you believe that? They let the load sit on the side rail for a month before deciding what to do with it. I bet they hit the end of clear-cutting Michigan. Along about this time, they were notified that the government would be confiscating plywood and 2x4s for the war effort. So the brothers and Ori, our milkman, took the wood to Luzerne and built a hunting cabin. They drove the wood up there in the dark of night with 1940s vehicles on 2-track roads and those tiny, insufficient headlights. What an adventure! They built the cabin on weekends, living army style in frame tents and eating over an open fire. Dad hired an old man to come and help him build the fireplace. The old man sat and drank and would tell the boys where to hit the rock to break it evenly. Then he would direct them to where to place the rock and how to correctly mortar the gaps to last 100 years. They built 2 heatilators, one on each side of the fireplace, that worked quite nicely blowing hot air out of the large grates. The mantel was quite high, and the boys had laid a sign up there that read, "Once a king, always a king, but once a knight is enough." I had to get quite tall to see it, and didn't see why it was funny. The mouth of the fireplace was big enough to accommodate cooking and cooking pots. It was truly a work of art, and I loved that thing. But depending on that old fireplace to keep you warm as a primary source of heat would have guaranteed that you would be cold.